Good morning. My name is Michael Robinson, and I am going to be showing you my term project that I created for my object-oriented development class at Columbus State. So the software design I wanted to use and kind of the scenario I wanted to create was a software application for airline agencies, just to assist them with customers being able to book flights, calculating the cost of their flights, based off of how many bags and how many tickets and where they're going, and also just a way for the flights to be able to manage their flights. And so I wanted to create this software application, and the users would be anyone that would want to fly with a certain airline agency. They can just put where they want to go and all the details of their flight and be given a estimate cost and details of what they need for their flights. Stakeholders would be any airline company that would want to use this application. There'd be some functionality for them to be able to manage their flights. And so for me, the scope of this, I just wanted to make a basic application for them to use for their customers and also for them to manage it. So I have the project running. So this is my application, MVC flight application. And this is just the launch screen, just a little splash screen to get started. So I'm going to be using three patterns in this. The MVC pattern, Model View Controller, the Decorator pattern, and the Factory pattern. And I'll go over those in detail in just a moment. Click Get Started. The first screen you come to is a list of available flights. Now this is in a text file inside the solution, so ideally you would have flights being updated daily and being sent to you, and they'd be updated and populated daily. But this is just one I created, so I created some test flights. I think I have 7. It shows their flight name, a destination, the cost per ticket of that flight, a departure time, arrival time, and how many people are allowed on that flight, a max occupancy. So if I was a customer and I came in and I wanted to book a flight, I would pick one that I wanted. Let's say I wanted to go to France. I'd hit this book flight. So then I'm taken to my book flight view. I have a passenger info section and a flight info section. So the flight info is just pulled over from the previous screen. It shows the name, destination, cost, times, and also this extra field down here called seats remaining. On the previous screen, if you go back, you see Air France has a max occupancy of 150. And so this shows 150, and you'd think it'd just be the field pulled over, but as a person books the flight, that number actually reduces. So if I come in here and I just create someone, say me, and let's say me and my wife are going to go to France. We have 2 bags, and we'll go round trip. And notice these first class and round trip fields, which weren't on the previous page, and the total bags and passengers. So notice I have Michael Robinson, 2 passengers, 2 bags. So inside of my application, I have a decorator pattern that actually calculates the cost based off of how many passengers you have, how many bags you have, and whether or not you're flying first class or round trip. And I'll debug that in just a few moments and show you how that works. But for total passengers 2, it'll be 2 times the cost, which is $1,300, which gives us $2,600. And then each bag is $25, which is an additional $50 on top. And since the round trip, we'll double the 2,600 by 2. So that'll give us $5,200 plus the bag fee, which is $50. So we should see $5,250 as the total cost. So if you hit book down here, you'll come to a confirmation page. Everything's read-only. And you'll see the details we just entered. Michael Robinson, 2 passengers, 2 bags, round trip. And down here, we have our flight details, and also notice the cost, which we just said was $5,250. It's been calculated for us. And there's also one more field, and this is just a documentation that's required for all flights within the U.S. It's just a valid picture ID. But since this one is going to France, you also need a valid passport. So if I hit confirm, I get taken back to the available flights. Now, just to show you how the occupancy works, if I come back into Air France, notice now the seats remaining says 148. So the 2 passengers I just created have been subtracted from the seats remaining. And so let's just say we have a big party going to France. We'll say big group. And let's say we want to have 150 passengers. We need the whole plane. And we'll also have 150 bags. And we're going to fly a round trip. So notice there's only 148 remaining, so we should get an error. So if I hit book it, notice it says there's not enough room for you on this flight. So we get an alert saying you can't do that. So now you either got to enter a smaller amount or pick a different flight. So what would happen, let's say we just, 2 people cancel and we're going to have the perfect amount, 148. We hit book flight, maybe. Let's go back. Let's do an easier one. This one just has 3 occupants, a little bit easier. So let's say we're going to be David. We'll have 3 passengers, 3 bags, and let's book it. Okay? So we're going to book this whole flight. So now when I come back in here for this private jet that only has 3 passengers, notice now it says 0 seats remaining. So if I came in here and I tried to book a flight, 1 person, book it, we get an alert that says there is no more room on this flight. So a little bit different alert. Instead of not being enough room, there is no more room. Okay? So that's just kind of how the seats remaining work. Now if we chose a US flight, and let's just put some info in here. On the confirmation, notice down here when we're within the US, it only says a valid picture ID. So there's no more passport involved. And that's pretty much it for booking the flights. One other thing I wanted to show you is if you come in here and you book a flight, or you try to book a flight, say we got 2 passengers, notice the seats remaining is 50. If I come in here to confirm, and let's say I change my mind, I don't want to, I hit cancel, and then come back into the flight, notice the seats remaining is still 50. It hasn't changed. So since you canceled, it doesn't get calculated inside of that. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the customer part. Now let's say if I'm a manager of the flight and I want to come in and see who's flying on my flights. So there I have this manage link. So we booked 1 group for this one, I believe. So if I hit manage, you see the flight details. You see the passengers that have booked, how many passengers they'll have, how many bags, whether they're first class or round trip. And down here it just shows you a little total, 3 passengers, 0 remaining. So if I go to that Air France and hit manage, so we didn't go through the second scenario, but we still have 2 passengers and there's 148 remaining. and they're flying round trip. So that way a user or a manager can come in here and just see how many passengers have booked, how many seats they still have remaining, who's booked, and how many bags they'll have in case they need to know that information. Okay, so that is pretty much the entirety of the application. I do want to go over the the patterns that I used and just show you how they work and what they look like inside of the application. So I'm going to close this page. Okay. So inside of my Solution Explorer, the first one I want to show you is that I'm using the MVC pattern, Model View Controller. And if you come over here inside Solution Explorer, you see how they've been broken down. I have my controllers folder that has the flight controller and the home controller. And really this home controller doesn't get used. I'm only using the flight controller. And then in my models, these three down here are kind of the overall models, and then I have some specific ones for my decorator pattern, and I think one or two for the factory. Yep, so there's my factory pattern models, and decorator has quite a few. Those are all the models. And all my views are down here in the views folder. All the flight views, the booking page, confirmation page, the list of flights, the manage page, all in there. And I think the only one in the home is just the launch page that I made. So we really don't need that, but I just put it in there for make it look better. So there's my model view and controllers, and they all interact with one another. So that's the MVC. Now I think I'll show the factory model first. So let's start this up in debug mode. And inside my Solution Explorer, if I click on Flight Controller, I've put a breakpoint here that we're going to hit. And I'll show you how that works in just a second. Okay, so let's pick a flight, put in some info, and book it. And so now we hit our breakpoint. So for the factory pattern, I've created a factory instance up here, new flight factory. And down here, I'm actually going to set this variable called flight. And let's just go ahead and enter this. I'm calling create flight. I send over the flight ID and how many passengers I have. So when I go inside, I have this create flight function inside of Flight Factory. So if I step through this, and I'm going to have to do this since F10 stops my recording, I'm going to have to keep hitting F10. So we set the flight to null, and then inside this switch statement, we have the flight ID, and this instantiates which flight we're flying on. So in this case, we're doing JetBlue. So I'm going to step over. Notice it hits JetBlue. And it sends the total passengers as well. And then it breaks and returns the flight instance. So now we're sent over a flight JetBlue with 2 passengers. Okay. We'll step over that. Step over one more time. And that's the factory pattern. It creates it for us. And so if we want to show the decorator pattern as well now, if we look at our application, it's going to calculate the cost. So it's going to take 150 of the ticket price for JetBlue and multiply it by 2. and then it's going to see if it's first class or round trip, and then just add on for us. Okay, so if I go down through here and step over these, it checks to see if it's first class and round trip, but it's not, so it skips that. See if it's first class and round trip is false, which is true. So we're going to step into this one. And so our passenger, which is flight passenger in this case, is going to get initialized with the cost, and then the total cost will be what shows up on our confirmation page as the total. So if I step over this, cost, one more, we're going to calculate it. Our total cost, $500. So it gets decorated with our flight that we created up here in the flight factory, which was a JetBlue. It gets the JetBlue, and then it gets decorated with first class if that's true, and then also the bags if that's true. And so in all three scenarios, you can have different decorators. In the top one, you'll have the flight, round trip, first class, and bags. Middle, just your flight, first class, and bags. You can also have just your flight, round trip, and bags, or just bags if you're not flying round trip or first class. And that's how it gets decorated. So if we hit continue, notice our cost is now $500. Our factory created the flight for us. Confirm it, and that's it. So if you wanted to see the UML for my project, let me show you that real quick. Okay, so I have the model view controller at the top. Here's my models, flight passenger view model, my flight controller, and all my views. It's composed of a flight factory, which creates a flight for us. And then it is also composed of the flight passenger class, which becomes composed of the decorator. And the decorator is inherited by first class, round trip, and bags. And our flight factory is made up of all of our flights. So this is just what my UML looks like. And that's all three of my patterns together. And this is my application that I created. So you can post some feedback or just let me know what you think and some improvements. But that's all. Thank you very much.